I beseech thee to aid and assist me at all times and under all conditions, and seek from the heaven of thy grace thine ancient favour. Thou art in truth the Lord of bounty and the sovereign of the kingdom of eternity. Baha'u'llah.
Allahu Akbar, everybody. Welcome back. Hope you're all doing well. You're happy. You've had a good day today. We are going to continue again with the Dawnbreakers. I'm going to give you a quick recap, as I usually do. So, what happened last time? We talked about Vahid, who had been asked to go by the king, by Muhammad Shah, from Tehran down to Shiraz. We covered the first couple of interviews that we had of him. And then the third one is where the Surah Kawthar, the Surah of Divine Plenitude, was, according to the Dawnbreakers, revealed unasked by the Bab. However, we do know there's a letter from the Bab saying, thank you for your letter and your question about the Surah Kawthar. So we know that that bit there is inaccurate because we have it in the Bab's own handwriting. Vahid then basically is blown away by everything he hears about this. He's then asked by the Bab to stay with the Bab's uncle, Haji Sayyid Mirza Ali, and to transcribe it and to check everything over that's gone, which he does, and he finds absolutely no issues whatsoever. Hussein Khan, who's the governor of Shiraz, is absolutely furious because Vahid is staying at Hussein Khan's house. However, he's not spending a lot of time there. He then finds out that Vahid has become a Babi. A letter is sent up to the king, to Muhammad Shah, telling him, look, he's a Babi. What shall I do with him? What shall I do? I think he's under the spell. Muhammad Shah is then heard saying to the Prime Minister, Haji Mirza Agassi, listen, whatever Vahid says is right. Do not dare do anything that tests Vahid. He's such an exalted station. It's a Sayyid as well. He's a descendant of Prophet Muhammad. Let's keep the respect there. As a result of this, Hussein Khan could not do anything to Vahid. Vahid is then told to go to Burujerd, which is this town over here, to go and speak to his father to see if he can win the support of his father. Unfortunately, this yielded no fruit. We then go to the story of Mullah Muhammad Ali, someone who's known by the name of Hujat Zanjani. So we move up to Zanjan, and the story of Hujat is absolutely beautiful. We know that Hujat had heard about the Bab. Hujat was someone who was against Sayyid Kazim and Sheikh Ahmad. He wasn't down with the Sheikhs who at all. He had lots of problems with a lot of the people who were there, with the clergymen. He would argue with them a lot. Hujat wouldn't listen to anybody, but he hears about Sayyid Bab. So he decides to send down a disciple of his down to Shiraz, and he says to him, look, I want you to go and investigate. His name was Mullah Iskandar. Mullah Iskandar goes down, he meets the Bab, he stays there for about 40 days, blown away by some of the things he hears. He then returns back to Zanjan to see Mullah Muhammad Ali Zanjani, or Hujat as he's known, to see Hujat. Hujat is in the middle of giving this sermon, and he says, wait, one second. Let's see what Mullah Iskandar finds. So what did you think? And Mullah Iskandar says, well, I have these documents here. Dear Hujat, you read it and you tell me what to think. Hujat is furious. He says, what are you talking about? You don't decide if the coming of the Ghaem is here or not based on somebody else's thoughts. He says, let me have a look at it. He opens up one of the scrolls in which he sees a copy of the Gayom al-Azma, the commentary on the Surah of Joseph. And there and then he shuts it, he falls prostrate to the ground, and he's completely and utterly in love, and he's on board. Hujat Mullah Muhammad Ali is now on board. Next, we hear about the stories of both Qaddus and Mullah Sadegh. Now, Qaddus and Mullah Sadegh, if we remember, they were beaten in Shiraz. They had metal rings put through their noses. They had their beards burnt off. They were dragged through the streets by Hussein Khan. They were told to leave Shiraz. So we rejoin their story. Now, we find out what happens to Qaddus. Qaddus is basically asked to go to Kerman. Kerman is just to the right over here on our map. And in Kerman, he goes there to interview someone by the name of Haji Mirza Karim Khan Kermani. This person is someone who's named as one of the antichrists of the Babi revelation. But he stays in the house of a very well-known ulama, someone by the name of Haji Sayyid Javed Kermani. So while he's there, people start realizing that Qaddus is there, and they think, well, why is Qaddus getting so much praise and he's this young guy? And they say to Haji Mirza Karim Khan, do something about this guy because he might get big. Who knows what's going to happen? So Karim Khan, this antichrist figure, decides that he's going to do something about it. He writes to the governor of Kerman and he says, look, do something with this guy. What is he doing? Blah, 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 blah. When Haji Sayyid Javed finds out about this, he gets furious. And he contacts the governor and says, Governor, how many times have I told you about Karim Khan's behavior? This is ridiculous. Like, why is he attacking me? I haven't done anything. You know what he's like. The governor then sides with Haji Sayyid Javad. And then Karim Khan, all his hopes that he had of being some big shot, some big leader of the Shaikhi community start to crumble apart. Then we hear that whilst in the house of Haji Sayyid Javed, he asked Godus many questions. And he says to Godus, listen, what exactly is the story? Godus shares his entire story. In the end, Haji Sayyid Javed decides, I believe, but he says, I'm going to conceal my faith because I think I can be of more help. Godus at this point says, right, well, that will be taken as a meritorious deed. Godus then from Karaman, he heads to a bunch of cities. He goes from Karaman, he then goes to Yazd, he then stops on a bunch of smaller places along the way, Ardakan, he goes to Nain. Eventually, he keeps going up until he comes to Kashan. When he goes to Kashan, from Kashan, he goes to Qom. From Qom, he then heads up to Tehran. We know that Nabil, the author of the Dawnbreakers, hears a story from Agha Halim, from Mirza Musa, Baha'u'llah's brother, about Godus, in which Agha Halim is lavishing copious praise upon Godus. And there's this little extract in there where he just talks about the qualities of Godus and the rest of it. While Godus is in Tehran, he meets Baha'u'llah in Tehran. He's told that he's going to be heading up to none other than Mazandaran. He goes back to Barfaroush, or Babul, as it's now called, and it's here on the map. He goes back there, which is the hometown where he's from. So Godus is staying there. And that's where he has a conversation with his stepmom, who basically says to him, when are you going to get married, Godus? When are you going to get married? He says, I promise I will be getting married in exactly 3 years in Barfaroush, Babul, in the main square. This is where my marriage will take place. 3 years later, we know that that is to witness the scene of his brutal, horrific martyrdom, where he's chopped into pieces and his body is thrown into a fire. We then join the story of Mullah Sadegh. Now, Mullah Sadegh had been asked to head over to Yazd, and this is where he heads over to. So if we find Yazd on our map, Mullah Sadegh is in Yazd. Now, while he's in Yazd, he wants to catch up with someone by the name of Mirza Ahmad Azghandi, who he'd known had taken on the faith earlier, but he seemed to be a bit quiet. So he goes there, he heads over to Yazd, and he's greeted by the uncle, Sayyid Hassan Azghandi, who welcomes him in, and they have a conversation, and he says, where is Mirza Ahmad Azghandi? And he says to him, oh, well, I'd sent my nephew, I'd sent him down to Karaman to try and take on Haji Mirza Karim Khan Karamani, remember the Antichrist. And he says, but things are too dangerous for him. This guy's causing so many problems. So the uncle writes a letter to Mirza Ahmad and says, come back. Mirza Ahmad then comes back, and there it's revealed that Mirza Ahmad had written this book containing 12,000 tradition of the promised dispensation. So it's written the 12,000 tradition, this huge book. He then gives it to his uncle, Sayyid Hassan Azghandi, who's blown away by this. He has an acquaintance called Mirza Taghi. Now, Mirza Taghi is very much seemingly blown away and says, wow, I would love to see this book. Please give me this book. What does he do with it? Absolutely nothing. He takes it and he throws it in a volume of water. That's it. It's then destroyed. Its pages are absolutely ruined. The ink starts to run, and that's it. Mirza Ahmad, after a while, says to his uncle, please, Sayyid Hussein, can you get my book back? Sayyid Hussein finds out what Mirza Taghi's done and wants to kill him. He's furious. He goes angry, but Mirza Ahmad calms him down. He says, listen, don't do this. They will find out, then they will twist this and turn us into Barbies and all sorts. Let's please not do this. At this point, Mullah Sadegh is very happy with him. Mullah Sadegh then realizes that he wants to go and do something. Now, whilst they're in Yazd, Sayyid Hassan Azghandi is giving a sermon in a mosque. And Mullah Sadegh decides to do what he always does, which is to go into the mosque, ascend the pulpit, and start giving his own sermon about the coming of someone phenomenal. He does this, starts speaking about the Ghaim, then people are angry, they want to rip Mullah Sadegh to pieces. Sayyid Hassan Azghandi calms them down, although Mullah Sadegh is grabbed, he's pulled, a whole bunch of things happen to him, but they say, look, don't beat him, I will take care of him. Then we jump to another story, a story of Mullah Yusuf Ardebili, who again, whilst he's in Yazd, is almost beaten for sharing the coming of the Ghaib. Then we know that Mullah Sadegh and Mullah Yusuf Ardebili go to Kerman. So they head down from Yazd, down towards Kerman over here, and again are embroiled in many disputes with Haji Mirza Karim Khan, who's trying to cause troubles for them. And that brings us up to date with what we covered last time.
Though hunted and harassed by their foes, the Bab's immediate disciples, together with their companions in different parts of Persia, were undeterred by such criminal acts from the accomplishment of their task. Unswerving in their purpose and immovable in their convictions, they continued to battle with the dark forces that assailed them every step of their path. By their unstinted devotion and unexampled fortitude, they were able to demonstrate to many of their countrymen the ennobling influence of the faith they had arisen to champion. While Wahid was still in Shiraz, Haji Sayyid Jawad Karbala arrived and was introduced by Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali into the presence of the Bab. In a tablet which he addressed to Wahid and Haji Sayyid Jawad, the Bab extolled the firmness of their faith and stressed the unalterable character of their devotion. The latter had met and known the Bab before the declaration of his mission and had been a fervent admirer of those extraordinary traits of character which had distinguished him ever since his childhood. At a later time, he met Baha'u'llah in Baghdad and became the recipient of his special favor. When, a few years afterwards, Baha'u'llah was exiled to Adrianople, he, already much advanced in years, returned to Persia, tarried a while in the province of Iraq, and then proceeded to Khurasan. His kindly disposition, extreme forbearance, and unaffected simplicity earned him the appellation of Sayyid Nur. Haji Sayyid Jawad, one day while crossing a street in Tehran, suddenly saw the Shah as he was passing on horseback. Undisturbed by the presence of his sovereign, he calmly approached and greeted him. His venerable figure and dignity of bearing pleased the Shah immensely. He acknowledged his salute and invited him to come and see him. Such was the reception accorded him that the courtiers of the Shah were moved with envy. "Does not your imperial majesty realize," they protested, "that this Haji Sayyid Jawad is none other than the man who, even prior to the declaration of the Sayyid Bab, had proclaimed himself a Babi and had pledged his undying loyalty to his person?" The Shah, perceiving the malice which actuated their accusations, was sorely displeased and rebuked them for their temerity and low-mindedness. "How strange," he is reported to have exclaimed. "Whoever is distinguished by the uprightness of his conduct and the courtesy of his manners, my people forthwith denounce him as a Babi and regard him as an object worthy of my condemnation." Haji Sayyid Jawad spent the last days of his life in Kerman and remained until his last hour a staunch supporter of the faith. He never wavered in his convictions nor relaxed in his unsparing endeavors for the diffusion of the cause. Sheikh Sultan Karbala, whose ancestors ranked among the leading ulamas of Karbala, and who himself had been a firm supporter and intimate companion of Sayyid Kazim, was also among those who in those days had met the Bab in Shiraz. It was he who at a later time proceeded to Sulaymaniyah in search of Baha'u'llah, and whose daughter was subsequently given in marriage to Agha Kalim. When he arrived at Shiraz, he was accompanied by Sheikh Hassan Zunuzi, to whom we have referred in the early pages of this narrative. To him, the Bab assigned the task of transcribing, in collaboration with Mullah Abdul Karim, the tablets which he had lately revealed. Sheikh Sultan, who had been too ill at the time of his arrival to meet the Bab, received one night, while still on his sickbed, a message from his beloved, informing him that at about 2 hours after sunset, he would himself visit him. That night, the Ethiopian servant, who was acting as lantern bearer to his master, was instructed to walk in advance at a distance which would keep away the attention of the people from him, and to extinguish the lantern as soon as he reached his destination. I have heard Sheikh Sultan himself describe that nocturnal visit. The Bab, who had bidden me extinguish the lamp in my room ere he arrived, came straight to my bedside. In the midst of the darkness which enveloped us, I was holding fast to the hem of his garment and was imploring him, "Fulfill my desire, O beloved of my heart, and allow me to sacrifice myself for thee, for no one else except thee is able to confer upon me this favor." "O Shaykh," the Bab replied, "I too yearn to immolate myself upon the altar of sacrifice. It behooves us both to cling to the garment of the best beloved and to seek from him the joy and glory of martyrdom in his path. Rest assured, I will, in your behalf, supplicate the Almighty to enable you to attain his presence. Remember me on that day, a day such as the world has never seen before." As the hour of parting approached, he placed in my hand a gift which he asked me to expend from myself. I tried to refuse, but he begged me to accept it. Finally, I acceded to his wish, whereupon he arose and departed. The allusion of the Bab that night to his best beloved excited my wonder and curiosity. In the years that followed, I oftentimes believed that the one whom the Bab had referred was none other than Tahir. I even imagined Sayyid Uluf to be that person. I was sorely perplexed and knew not how to unravel this mystery. When I reached Karbala and attained the presence of Baha'u'llah, I became firmly convinced that he alone could claim such affection from the Bab, that he and only he could be worthy of such adoration. The second Nowruz after the declaration of the Bab's mission, which fell on the 21st day of the month of Rabiul Awwal in the year 1262 AH, found the Bab still in Shiraz, enjoying, under circumstances of comparative tranquility and ease, the blessings of undisturbed association with his family and kindred. Quietly and unceremoniously, he celebrated the festival of Nowruz in his own home, and in accordance with his invariable custom, bountifully conferred upon both his mother and his wife the marks of his affection and favor. By the wisdom of his counsels and the tenderness of his love, he cheered their hearts and dispelled their apprehensions. He bequeathed to them all his possessions and transferred to their names the title of his property. In a document which he himself wrote and signed, he directed that his house and its furniture, as well as the rest of his estate, should be regarded as the exclusive property of his mother and his wife, and that upon the death of the former,
her share of the property should revert to his wife.
The mother of the Bab failed at first to recognize the significance of the mission proclaimed by her son. She remained for a time unaware of the magnitude of the forces latent in his revelation. As she approached the end of her life, however, she was able to perceive the inestimable quality of that treasure which she had conceived and given to the world. It was Baha'u'llah who eventually enabled her to discover the value of that hidden treasure which had lain for so many years concealed from her eyes. She was living in Iraq, where she had hoped to spend the remaining days of her life, when Baha'u'llah instructed two of his devoted followers, Haji Sayyid Jawad Karbala and the wife of Haji Abdul Majid Shirazi, both of whom were already intimately acquainted with her, to instruct her in the principles of the faith. She acknowledged the truth of the cause and remained until the closing years of the 13th century AH, when she departed this life, fully aware of the bountiful gifts which the Almighty had chosen to confer upon her.
So we're continuing our story with none other than Haji Sayyid Jawad Karbala, who is in Shiraz. Now he's in Shiraz, he ends up meeting the Bab. He's then told to head to Khorasan, which he goes up to, and he completes these amazing missions where in Khorasan he's then given the title Sayyid al-Nur, meaning the Sayyid of Light. The Shah has seen Haji Sayyid Jawad Karbala walking along there. He started speaking to him and he's like, wow, this guy's really nice and this is really good. And then one of the assistants of the Shah turned around and said, well, hang on, that guy, he's a guy who's a Babi. You shouldn't talk to the Babis of the Babi. And the Shah notes at this point, why is there all this animosity towards the Babi? And also notes that anyone that he's come across that he's met, who's really nice, they claim that he's a Babi. This is very interesting. Then we go on to learn a little bit about Sheikh Sultana Karbelai, whose daughter ended up actually marrying Baha'u'llah's brother. He was ill one night and he wanted to meet the Bab, and he's basically told that no, actually the Bab's going to come and meet him. So in the middle of the night, the Ethiopian servant comes with the light, leads him all the way to his house, and then the Bab goes and visits him. Can you imagine this? The Bab going to visit him. Sheikh Sultan is just so blown away and he begs the Bab and says, please let me be a martyr. I want to be a martyr for this cause. The Bab says, I will also be a martyr. And then the Bab mentions this best beloved that's going to be met. Who is this best beloved that the Bab's talking about? And Sheikh Sultan basically can't sleep. He just can't get over this. He doesn't know who it is. He thinks at one point maybe it's this guy Sayyid Ulav, and he's not entirely sure. It's only later when he's up in Karbala that he realizes that this person must be Baha'u'llah. Such is the greatness that he recognizes. We know that Bab was still in Shiraz in 1262, it says. So in 1262, the footnote talks about 1846, obviously 2 years on from 1844. He's still there. Whilst he's there, he then writes this will in which he entrusts his goods to his beloved wife and mother, and they're all given in. The mother of the Bab, we find out, doesn't really understand who the Bab is until later on when she's, I think, up in Iraq, does she fully clock this. So the mother of the Bab eventually then believes.
The wife of the Bab, unlike his mother, perceived at the earliest dawn of his revelation the glory and the uniqueness of his mission, and felt from the very beginning the intensity of its force. No one except Tahareh among the women of her generation surpassed her in the spontaneous character of her devotion, nor excelled the fervor of her faith. To her the Bab confided the secrets of his future sufferings, and unfolded to her eyes the significance of the events that were to transpire in his day. He bade her not to divulge the secret to his mother, and counseled her to be patient and resigned to the will of God. He entrusted her with a special prayer, revealed and written by himself, the reading of which, he assured her, would remove her difficulties and lighten the burden of her woes. In the hour of your perplexity, he directed her, recite this prayer ere you go to sleep. I myself will appear to you and will banish your anxiety. Faithful to his advice, every time she turned to him in prayer, the light of his unfailing guidance illumined her path and resolved her problems. After the Bab had settled the affairs of his household and provided for the future maintenance of both his mother and his wife, he transferred his residence from his own home to that of Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali. There he awaited the approaching hour of his sufferings. He knew that the afflictions which were in store for him could no longer be delayed, that he was soon to be caught in a whirlwind of adversity which would carry him swiftly to the field of martyrdom, the crowning object of his life. He bade those of his disciples who had settled in Shiraz, among whom were Mullah Abdul Karim and Sheikh Hassan al-Zunuzi, to proceed to Esfahan and there await his further instructions. Sayyid Hossein Yazdi, one of the letters of the living who had recently arrived at Shiraz, was likewise instructed to proceed to Esfahan and to join the company of his fellow disciples in that city. Meanwhile, Hussein Khan, the governor of Fars, was bending every effort to involve the Bab in fresh embarrassments and to degrade him still further in the eyes of the public. The smouldering fire of his hostility was fanned to flame by the knowledge that the Bab was allowed to pursue unmolested the course of his activities, that he was still able to associate with certain of his companions, and that he continued to enjoy the benefits of unrestrained fellowship with his family and kindred. By the aid of his secret agents, he succeeded in obtaining accurate information regarding the character and influence of the movement which the Bab had initiated. He had secretly watched his movements, ascertained the degree of enthusiasm which he had aroused, and scrutinized the motives, the conduct, and the number of those who had embraced his cause. One night there came to Hussein Khan, the chief of his emissaries, with the report that the number of those who were crowding to see the Bab had amassed such proportions as to necessitate immediate action on the part of those whose function it was to guard the security of the city. The eager crowd that gathers every night to visit the Bab, he remarked, surpasses in number the multitude of people that throngs every day before the gates of the seat of your government. Among them are to be seen Men celebrated alike for their exalted rank and extensive learning. Such are the tact and lavish generosity which his maternal uncle displays in his attitude towards the officials of your government, that no one among your subordinates is inclined to acquaint you with the reality of the situation. If you would permit me, I will, with the aid of a number of your attendants, surprise the Bab at the hour of midnight, and will deliver, handcuffed, into your hands certain of his associates, who will enlighten you concerning his activities, and will confirm the truth of my statements. Hussein Khan refused to comply with his wish. I can tell better than you, was his answer, what the interests of the state require. Watch me from a distance, I shall know how to deal with him. That very moment, the governor summoned Abdul Hamid Khan, the chief constable of the city. Proceed immediately, he commanded him, to the house of Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali. Quietly and unobserved, scale the wall and ascend to the roof, and from there suddenly enter his home. Arrest the Sayyid Bab immediately, and conduct him to this place together with any of the visitors who may be present with him at that time. Confiscate whatever books and documents you are able to find in that house. As to Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali, it is my intention to impose upon him the following day the penalty for having failed to redeem his promise. I swear by the imperial diadem of Muhammad Shah that this very night I shall have the Sayyid Bab executed together with his wretched companions. The ignominious death will quench the flame they have kindled, and will awaken every would-be follower of that creed to the danger that awaits every disturber of the peace of this realm. By this act I shall have extirpated a heresy, the continuance of which constitutes the gravest menace to the interests of the state. Abdul Hamid Khan retired to execute his task. He, together with his assistants, broke into the house of Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali and found the Bab in the company of his maternal uncle and a certain Sayyid Kazem Zanjani, who was later martyred in Mazandaran, and whose brother Sayyid Murtada was one of the 7 martyrs of Tehran. He immediately arrested them, collected whatever documents he could find, ordered Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali to remain in his house, and conducted the rest to the seat of the government. The Bab, undaunted and self-possessed, was heard to repeat this verse of the Quran. That with which they are threatened is for the morning, is not the morning near. No sooner had the chief constable reached the marketplace than he discovered, to his amazement, that the people of the city were fleeing from every side in consternation, as if overtaken by an appalling calamity. He was struck with horror when he witnessed a long train of coffins being hurriedly transported through the streets, each followed by a procession of men and women, loudly uttering shrieks of agony and pain. This sudden tumult, the lamentations, the affrighted countenances, the imprecations of the multitude distressed and bewildered him. He inquired as to the reason. This very night, he was told, a plague of exceptional virulence has broken out. We are smitten by its devastating power. Already since the hour of midnight, it has extinguished the lives of over 100 people. Alarm and despair reign in every house. The people are abandoning their homes, and in their plight are invoking the aid of the Almighty. Abdul Hamid Khan, terrified by this dreadful intelligence, ran to the home of Hussein Khan. An old man who guarded his house and was acting as doorkeeper informed him that the house of his master was deserted, that the ravages of the pestilence had devastated his home and afflicted the members of his household. 2 of his Ethiopian maids, he was told, and a manservant have already fallen victim to this scourge, and members of his own family are now dangerously ill. In his despair, my master has abandoned his home, and leaving the dead unburied, has fled with the rest of his family to the Bagh Takht. Abdul Hamid Khan decided to conduct the Bab to his own home and keep him in his custody, pending instructions from the governor. As he was approaching his house, he was struck by the sound of weeping and wailing of the members of his household. His son had been attacked by the plague and was hovering on the brink of death. In his despair, he threw himself at the feet of the Bab and tearfully implored him to save the life of his son. He begged him to forgive his past transgressions and misdeeds. I adjure you, he entreated the Bab as he clung to the hem of his garment, by him who has elevated you to this exalted position, to intercede in my behalf and to offer a prayer for the recovery of my son. Suffer not that he in the prime of youth be taken away from me. Punish him not for the guilt which his father has committed. I repent of what I have done, and at this moment resign my post. I solemnly pledge my word that never again will I accept such a position, even though I perish of hunger. The Bab, who was in the act of performing his ablutions and was preparing to offer the prayer of dawn, directed him to take some of the water with which he was washing his face to his son and to request him to drink it. This, he said, would save his life. No sooner had Abdul Hamid Khan witnessed the signs of the recovery of his son than he wrote a letter to the governor in which he acquainted him with the whole situation and begged him to cease his attacks on the Bab. Have pity on yourself, he wrote him, as well as those whom Providence has committed to your care. Should the fury of this plague continue its fatal course, no one in this city, I fear, will by the end of this day have survived the horror of its attack. Hussein Khan replied that the Bab should be immediately released and given freedom to go wherever he might please. As soon as an account of these happenings reached Tehran and was brought to the attention of the Shah, an imperial edict dismissing Hussein Khan from office was issued and sent to Shiraz. From the day of his dismissal, that shameless tyrant fell a victim to the countless misfortunes and was in the end unable to earn even his daily bread. No one seemed willing or able to save him from his evil plight. When at a later time Baha'u'llah had been banished to Baghdad, Hussein Khan sent him a letter in which he expressed repentance and promised to atone for his past misdeeds, on condition that he should regain his former position. Baha'u'llah refused to answer him. Sunk in misery and shame, he languished until his death. The Bab, who was staying at the home of Abdul Hamid Khan, sent Sayyid Kazem to request Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali to come and see him. He informed his uncle of his intended departure from Shiraz, entrusted both his mother and his wife to his care, and charged them to convey to each the expression of his affection and the assurance of God's unfailing assistance. Wherever they may be, he told his uncle as he bade him farewell, God's all-encompassing love and protection will surround them. I will again meet you amid the mountains of Azerbaijan, whence I will send you forth to obtain the crown of martyrdom. I myself will follow you, together with one of my loyal disciples, and will join you in the realm of eternity.
We are in Shiraz, and we hear of these happenings. We hear a little bit about the wife of the Bab, Khajideh, and there's some beautiful stories actually regarding her, which I suggest you maybe go into and read, in this dream that the Bab has with her, which is absolutely beautiful. But we hear a little bit about the wife of the Bab, and we know that there's only one woman in that dispensation who's greater, and that is none other than Tahireh. Such is the power and the majesty of the wife of the Bab. We know that the Bab had told his wife of basically what's going to happen. He said, look, I'm going to go through all these sufferings and martyrdom, and he said, we are no longer going to spend any more time together. He revealed a prayer for the wife of the Bab, and he said, I want you to say this whenever you're down and whenever you're sorrowful, know that I'm there for you. Here's a special prayer that's revealed for you. He then went to live with his uncle, Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali. So he left his home and he'd gone to live with his uncle. To Mullah Abdul Karim and to Sheikh Hussein Yazdi, he sent them and he said, look, you guys go to Isfahan, okay? So they're in Shiraz. He said, look, I want you to head up to Isfahan. So we start sending them away. Hussein Khan had now kept watch, and he was watching exactly who was coming into Shiraz, who was going out, because he was very concerned about the Bab and the power that he had. And he basically was like, I'm going to keep tabs on him. One of his chief emissaries then said to him, look, Hussein Khan, I tell you what, he's so powerful. I've come up with this plan. I'll go at the hour of midnight and I'm going to arrest the Bab. And Hussein Khan says, no, I'm not going to get the Bab. Don't worry, I'm not going to get the Bab. In fact, I've got a better idea. Yes, I'm going to go and get the Bab. So pretty much comes up with the same plan, but he gets this guy by the name of Abdul Hamid Khan to go on this mission. So Abdul Hamid Khan, on orders from Hussein Khan, the governor, decides, right, I'm going to do it. So he goes in the middle of the night, and there's maybe Mission Impossible music playing. Probably not. But he's going along, and then he scales the roof, and then he slides down into the house of his uncle, basically, with probably turbans tied together. So I said, and then he gets the Bible and he says, aha, I've got you. And of course, the Bab is there with Sayyid Kazim Zanjani, and he grabs the Bab, and as he goes outside, he hears all this screaming and the shouting, and he's thinking to himself, what is this noise? I don't know what this noise is. All of a sudden, he realized that there's been an outbreak of cholera. People are running and screaming. So Abdul Hamid Khan is going along with the Bab, heading towards Hussein Khan's house, the governor's house. Just trying to get there. As he gets there, he realized that Hussein Khan isn't there. Hussein Khan had actually run away to Barkatah, this garden. He's gone. Abdul Hamid Khan was like, right, well, what do I do with the Bab now? I know, I'll take him back to my house. As he goes with the Bab, he hears this screaming, he hears this noise coming back from his house. What is it? His wife opens the door and says, come, our son's dying. He's then terrified. He then runs up, and Abdul Hamid Khan sees his own son who's dying. He's actually going to die from this outbreak of cholera that's taking place. He looks at the Bab and says, please, if you're someone holy, can you do something? Save my son, save my son. The Bab, who's then doing his ablution, says, yes, give your son to drink some of my ablution waters, and that will heal him. Lo and behold, the son drinks this, and he gets completely fine. Abdul Hamid Khan is so blown away, he then writes to Hussein Khan, and he says to Hussein Khan, please, look, this is what happened. He saved the life of my son. Hussein Khan says, right, I don't know what to do with him. As long as we just kick him out of Shiraz, that's fine. Tell him he's got to leave Shiraz, and that's all I'll do. We then hear that later on, a letter is sent from the Shah, from Muhammad Shah, which basically kicks him out of office. He's sacked. He goes, he has no money, he has nothing. He then sends a letter to Baha'u'llah, and he says to Baha'u'llah, please, Baha'u'llah, look, if you give me my job back, give me my position back, I promise this time I'll be nice. Baha'u'llah doesn't even bother responding. The Bab had then told his uncle, I am going to have to leave Shiraz, and I'm going to be heading up to Isfahan. Please look after my wife and my mum. You are entrusted with looking after them. He then goes on to say that you'll be martyred before me. I soon shall follow in martyr.
In the story that we've been reading, of course, we learned that the first person to recognize the Bab was Mullah Hussein. Recently, not too long ago, I heard that actually the first person to recognize the Bab was his beloved wife. And I was wondering whether yourself or our dear friend Khazé could comment on this.
From what I understand, yes, you're absolutely right. The beloved wife of the Bab hears some noise, goes upstairs to the upper chamber and sees the Bab enraptured in prayer with light coming out. And she picks up at that point exactly who she is. So actually, you're right, the first person to recognize the Bab is indeed the wife. From this moment in 1844, and it's from that moment there that Mullah Hussein is charged with being the first letter of the living. So it's an interesting situation. There were other people as well, not just the wife of the Bab, Sayyid Kazim, of course. If you remember when the Bab was in the classes of Sayyid Kazim in Karbala, Sayyid Kazim knows exactly who the Bab is. He says many things such as, this ray of light is on that lap, and he points. And they say to Sayyid Kazim, why don't you tell us who it is? Why don't you tell us who it is? And he doesn't deny and say, I don't know who it is. He says, if I do, my throat will be cut. We can't divulge his name now. Now isn't the time to know. So yeah, it's not, Mullah Hussein isn't technically the first person to recognize him. You're right. I think Sayyid Kazim and then actually the wife of the Bab are the first two people.
In the case of Mullah Hussein, it was a declaration of the manifestation of God. In the case of his wife, she was an observation. She wasn't told that he was sent by God as Qa'im.
Yeah, that's a true point. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know that Qaddus, for example, there was no declaration to Qaddus. Qaddus just sees the Bab and Qaddus recognizes. Tahireh as well just sees the Bab in this vision and recognizes it. So it's quite mystical. Who knows who else has picked up on the powers?
Second to the last page here, it mentions Sayyid Kazem, but this is a different Sayyid Kazem than the famous Sayyid Kazem.
It is indeed.
It would be nice if they used his full name there, so people like me who don't understand Persian would figure out, oh, that's a different Sayyid Kazem than the first one.
Well, actually, Derek, the Dawnbreakers does this a lot. It will first introduce someone with their full name. So it actually does say, to begin with, it says Sayyid Kazem Zanjani. So that's his full name. So it sets it out who it is, but then they end up dropping the extra bits. Then they just carry on with Sayyid Kazim. So just like with the name Haji Mirza Jani Kashani, they'll say Haji Mirza Jani Kashani, blah, blah, blah. Then it will just say Haji Mirza Jani, and then sometimes we'll call him Mirza Jani. It sometimes narrows down. But you're quite right. This is a different Sayyid Kazim.
Just a comment. I find, I agree with Rick, it can be very difficult. I find it easier to actually have the book by my side, because then I can flick back and forth in the pages. And a couple of pages before it actually refers to Sayyid Kazim. I had the same doubt in my mind as Rick had, and I thought, well, where's Sayyid Kazim coming from? And then I flicked back a couple of pages and it referred to Sayyid Kazim Zanjani. So I find it much easier, myself personally at least anyway, to have the book by my side and I can just refer to it.
A very good point. The first time I read it, I was convinced it was the same Sayyid Kazim. I was like, what's going on? And this is one of the things of breaking the codes of the Dawnbreakers. We're going to talk about the Bab's sojourn in Isfahan. Now, a lot of the writings that we have from the Bab really are from this point in Isfahan going forward. A lot of the earlier writings that we had in Shiraz were actually lost because of the attacks against the Babis in Shiraz. A lot of the Babis ended up washing out the pages and getting rid of the ink to not have any incriminating evidence. We pretty much have all of the Bab's writings from the Isfahan period onwards. And the Bab in Isfahan would always write on blue paper, and he'd have blue ink. So if you find any writings of the Bab that are on blue paper with blue ink, it's almost guaranteed that they're from this period in Esfahan. Just a little side note. We're dealing with the Bab in Esfahan in 1846, and just for people, just so we know this acronym SIKQT, SIKQT, Shiraz. Esfahan is the next place that we're going to be.
The summer of the year 1262 AH was drawing to a close when the Bab bade his last farewell to his native city of Shiraz and proceeded to Esfahan. Syed Kazim Zanjani accompanied him on that journey. As he approached the outskirts of the city, he wrote a letter to the governor of the province, Manucher Khan, the Mutamede Dawle, in which he requested him to signify his wish as to the place where he could dwell. The letter, which he entrusted to Syed Kazim, was expressive of such courtesy and revealed such exquisite penmanship that the Mutamed was moved to instruct Sultana Ulama, the Imam Jume of Esfahan, the foremost ecclesiastical authority of that province, to receive the Bab in his own home and to accord him a kindly and generous reception. In addition to his message, the governor sent the Imam Jume the letter he had received from the Bab. The Sultana Ulama accordingly bade his own brother, whose savage cruelty in later years earned him the appellation of Raksha from Baha'u'llah, to proceed with a number of his favorite companions to meet and escort the expected visitor to the gate of the city. As the Bab approached, the Imam Jume went out to welcome him in person and conducted him ceremoniously to his house. Such were the honors accorded to the Bab in those days that when on a certain Friday he was returning from the public bath to the house, a multitude of people were seen eagerly clamoring for the water which he had used for his ablutions. His fervent admirers firmly believed in its unfailing virtue and power to heal their sicknesses and ailments. The Imam Jume himself had from the very first night become so enamored with him, who was the object of such devotion, that assuming the functions of an attendant, he undertook to minister to the needs and wants of his beloved guest. Seizing the ewer from the hand of the chief steward and utterly ignoring the customary dignity of his rank, he proceeded to pour out the water over the hands of the Bab. One night after supper, the Imam Jume, whose curiosity had been excited by the extraordinary traits of his character, which his youthful guest had revealed, ventured to request him to reveal a commentary on the Surah of Al-Asr. His request was readily granted. Calling for pen and paper, the Bab, with astonishing rapidity and without the least premeditation, began to reveal in the presence of his host a most illuminating interpretation of the aforementioned surah. It was nearing midnight when the Bab found himself engaged in the exposition of the manifold implications involved in the first letter of that surah. That letter, the letter Vav, upon which Sheikh Ahmad al-Asya had already laid such emphasis in his writings, symbolized for the Bab the advent of a new cycle of divine revelation, and has since been alluded to by Baha'u'llah in the Kitab-i-Aqdas, in such passages as the mastery of the great reversal and the sign of the sovereign. The Bab soon after began to chant in the presence of his host and his companions, the homily with which he had prefaced his commentary on the surah. Those words of power confounded his hearers with wonder. They seemed as if bewitched by the magic of his voice. Instinctively, they started to their feet and together with the Imam Jume, reverently kissed the hem of his garment. Mullah Muhammad Taqi Hayati, an eminent mujtahid, broke out into a sudden expression of exultation and praise. Peerless and unique, he exclaimed, as are the words which have streamed from this pen to be able to reveal within so short a time and in so legible a writing, so great a number of verses as to equal a fourth, nay a third of the Quran, is in itself an achievement such as no mortal without the intervention of God could hope to perform. Neither the cleaving of the moon nor the quickening of the pebbles of the sea can compare with so mighty an act. As the Bab's fame was being gradually diffused over the entire city of Esfahan, an unceasing stream of visitors flowed from every quarter to the house of the Imam Jume. A few to satisfy their curiosity, others to obtain a deeper understanding of the fundamental verities of his faith, and still others to seek the remedy for their ills and sufferings. The Mu'tamed himself came one day to visit the Bab, and while seated in the midst of an assemblage of the most brilliant and accomplished divines of Esfahan, requested him to expound the nature and demonstrate the validity of the Nubuwwat-e-Kasi. He had previously in that same gathering called upon those who were present to adduce such proofs and evidences in support of this fundamental article of their faith as would constitute an unanswerable testimony for those who were inclined to repudiate its truth. No one, however, seemed capable of responding to his invitation. "Which do you prefer?" asked the Bab. "A verbal or a written answer to your question?" "A written reply," he answered. "Not only would please those who are present at this meeting, but would edify and instruct both the present and future generations." The Bab instantly took up his pen and began to write. In less than 2 hours, he had filled about 50 pages with a most refreshing and circumstantial inquiry into the origin, the character, and the pervasive influence of Islam. The originality of his dissertation, the vigor and vividness of its style, the accuracy of its minutest details, invested his treatment of that noble theme with an excellence which no one among those who were present on that occasion could have failed to perceive. With masterly insight, he linked the central idea in the concluding passages of his exposition with the advent of the promised Ghayam and the expected return of the Imam Hussein. He argued with such force and courage that those who heard him recite its verses were astounded by the magnitude of his revelation. No one dared to insinuate the slightest objection, much less openly to challenge his statements. The Mu'tamed could not help giving vent to his enthusiasm and joy. "Hear me," he exclaimed. "Members of this revered assembly, I take you as my witnesses. Never until this day have I in my heart been firmly convinced of the truth of Islam. I can henceforth, thanks to this exposition penned by this youth, declare myself a firm believer in the faith proclaimed by the Apostle of God. I solemnly testify to my belief in the reality of the superhuman power with which this youth is endowed, a power which no amount of learning can ever impart."
So we know the Bab was going from Shiraz, and he said to his uncle, Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali, "I'm going to be going, you look after my mum and my wife." He's then heading up from Shiraz, going up to Esfahan. Now he's going with Sayyid Kazim Zanjani, not to be confused with Sayyid Kazim Rashid. The Bab writes a letter to Manucher Khan, the governor, the Mu'tamed Dawla. As they're going up, this letter is shared with the Imam Jami', the highest ranking Muslim clergy who does the Friday prayers, and it's decided that he will stay with the Imam Jami'. That's who he's going to stay with. The Imam Jami' receives him and they get on very much. The Bab is then doing his ablutions, and he's there and he's doing all his ablutions, and even though the Imam Jami' has a rank, which Sayyid Bab doesn't particularly have a rank seemingly to the outside world, the Imam Jami' starts pouring, using the water for the Bab to do his ablutions. Such is the love that the Imam Jami', this clergyman, has for His Holiness the Bab. Now, people have heard about this story that has happened down in Shiraz, that this person who'd kidnapped the Bab, essentially this constable who kidnapped the Bab, his son was dying, the son drinks the ablution water. Now people start going a bit crazy, like a magician. They think the Bab is there, and they start clambering over this water. They want to drink the ablution water of the Bab. Quite amazing, really. The Imam Jami' then decides to have a conversation with the Bab, and he says, "Please, can you expound on the verse of the Surah Wal-Asr from the Quran?" The Bab says, "No problem." And he talks about the letter Vav. Now, the letter Vav is the first letter of this surah, and I believe this is about 200 pages or something like this. It's a huge piece of work just on the letter Vav, which is the letter V. Now, next session, I'm going to go into this and explain a little bit about this, because this is actually a beautiful piece of work that he does. So much so that Baha'u'llah talks about it in the Kitab Aqdas. And he talks about how it's basically the Bab being at the end of one cycle, at the beginning of a new one. And it's very interesting, this whole Vav thing. So we'll actually touch on that next time. I'll get some graphics up on the screen which will help explain it. Someone by the name of Mullah Muhammad Tagir Harati is there. And when he reads this, he is blown away. He's absolutely blown away by this commentary on just this first letter alone of Wal-Asr. Other people who were there in the vicinity of Isfahan are just blown away by the Bab. They're really falling in love with the Bab. And this seems to happen quite a lot wherever the Bab goes. So the governor by the name of Manucher Khan, he then has an audience with the Bab. he then asks, the Bible says, look, please could you expound on the Nubuvat Chaseh? He said, can you go into this, which I think it deals with the mission of Muhammad. And says, please, could you go with that? And the Bible says, sure, what would you like? Would you like a written explanation or a verbal explanation? He says to him, well, actually, maybe if you could do a written one, because then we could pass this on to many people, it'd be a very interesting thing that you could come up with. So in 2 hours, the Bab with such rapidity writes 50 pages worth, going into the origin and into the character of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and it sort of ends with this thing about the promised Ghaim coming and him whom God shall make manifest. So touched was Manasseh Khan, so blown away was he, that he basically turns up and he says, look, I have been brought up with Islam my whole life, and actually this, what the Bab has written, this has completely and utterly blown me away, and I now believe in Islam more than I've ever believed it at all. I've met a couple of people who've read this. This one lady, actually, that I met recently, who became a Baha'i purely on reading this Surah Al-Baqarah. So powerful it was. And it's such a shame that us in the West, well, I can only speak for myself. My Arabic or my Persian isn't great enough to read these tablets.
An amazing story that the governor of Isfahan becomes a Babi there and then. It's absolutely fascinating. A question. I was reading just before that, he requested the Bab to expound on what's called the Nubuvat Chaseh.
I don't think we have time.
Very briefly, in a few words, could you expound upon that?
Okay. Please God that I say the right thing. The word Chaseh comes from the word makhsus. You know, Persians know and Arabs know makhsus. Makhsus means special, specific. Now, Nubuvat means prophethood, the status of being a Nabi, Dave. So, the Prophet of God, peace be upon him, has a specific station of prophethood. Now, all prophets are one in essence, as Baha'u'llah says in the Book of Surtuh. They all abide on the same throne, they utter the same speech, there is absolute unity in essence. But, dearest Dave, there is something khaseh, specific, and the specificity of that prophethood is that the Bab expounds that it ends the Adamic cycle. It ends the cycle of prophecy because his being is associated with the end of the week. You know, you have Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. But in a way, the prophethood of Muhammad is related to the end of the week, Jumu'ah, when you have the collective organization of all the prophecies. So then what comes after all the prophecies? The answer is one thing, Dave, is the fulfillment of the prophecies. So at the end of the prophecies to do with the Qiyamah, you have the one who arises, the Bab, proclaiming his reality. This is why the Prophet Muhammad and his nature is specific, that because after the dispensation of Islam, the world was discovered, talking in humanistic terms. All the world became one, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Canada, even Reading. So the world became globalized, unitized, planetized. So that prophecy then, Dave, led to the Babi Baha'i faith. Sorry, I only had 1 minute. Thank you.
Superb, Doctor. Thank you so much.
The interesting thing about Manasseh Khan was that he was born an Armenian Christian and was captured and made a slave and was castrated as a child. And so his faith was actually Christianity, but in the political structure, he more or less had to convert to Islam. But he was confessing here, now that he had achieved great status in political spheres, he had been appointed by the Shah to be the head of the biggest city of Iran. Now he had the freedom to say, I actually never believed in Islam until this moment. So the Bab, with his new faith, convinced this Armenian Christian who had never really given up Christianity, apparently, that Muhammad was a true prophet. The growing popularity of the Bab aroused the resentment of the ecclesiastical authorities of Isfahan, who viewed with concern and envy the ascendancy which an unlearned youth was slowly acquiring over the thoughts and consciences of their followers. They firmly believed that unless they rose to stem the tide of popular enthusiasm, the very foundations of their existence would be undermined. A few of the more sagacious among them thought it wise to abstain from acts of direct hostility to either the person or the teachings of the Bab, as such actions they felt would serve only to enhance his prestige and consolidate his position. The mischief makers, however, were busily engaged in disseminating the wildest reports concerning the character and claims of the Bab. These reports soon reached Tehran and were brought to the attention of Haji Mirza Aqqasi, the Grand Vizier of Muhammad Shah. This haughty and overbearing minister viewed with apprehension the possibility that his sovereign might one day feel inclined to befriend the Bab, an inclination which he felt sure would precipitate his own downfall. The Haji was, moreover, apprehensive lest the Mutamed, who enjoyed the confidence of the Shah, should succeed in arranging an interview between the sovereign and the Bab. He was well aware that should such an interview take place, the impressionable and tender-hearted Muhammad Shah would be completely won over by the attractiveness and novelty of that creed. Spurred on by such reflections, he addressed a strongly worded communication to the Imam Jummeh, in which he upbraided him for his grave neglect of the obligation imposed upon him to safeguard the interests of Islam. "We have expected you," Haji Mirza Aqqasi wrote him, "to resist with all your power every cause which conflicts with the best interests of the government and people of this land. You seem instead to have befriended, nay, to have glorified the author of this obscure and contemptible movement." He likewise wrote a number of encouraging letters to the ulamas of Isfahan, whom he had previously ignored, but upon whom he now lavished his special favors. The Imam Jummeh, while refusing to alter his respectful attitude towards his guest, was induced by the tone of the message he had received from the Grand Vizier to instruct his associates to devise such means as would tend to lessen the ever-increasing number of visitors who thronged each day to the presence of the Bab. Muhammad Mehdi, surnamed Safir al-Ulama, son of the late Haji Kalbasi, was, in his desire to gratify the wish and to earn the esteem of Haji Mirza Aqqasi, began to calumniate the Bab from the pulpit and in the most unseemly language. As soon as the Mutamed was informed of these developments, he sent a message to the Imam Jummeh in which he reminded him of the visit he, as governor, had paid to the Bab and extended to him as well as to his guest an invitation to his home. The Mutamed invited Haji Sayyid Asadullah, son of the late Haji Sayyid Muhammad Baghair Rashti, Haji Muhammad Jafar Badir, Muhammad Mehdi, Mirza Hassan Nuri, and a few others to be present at that meeting. Haji Sayyid Asadullah refused the invitation and endeavored to dissuade those who had been invited from participating in that gathering. "I have sought to excuse myself," he informed them, "and I would most certainly urge you to do the same. I regard it as most unwise of you to meet the Sayyid Bab face to face. He will, no doubt, reassert his claim and will, in support of his argument, adduce whatever proof you may desire him to give, and without the least hesitation will reveal as a testimony to the truth he bears verses of such a number as would equal half the Quran. In the end, he will challenge you in these words, 'Produce likewise if ye are men of truth.' We can in no wise successfully resist him. If we disdain to answer him, our impotence will have been exposed. If we, on the other hand, submit to his claim, we shall not only be forfeiting our own reputation, our own prerogatives and rights, but will have committed ourselves to acknowledge any further claims that he may feel inclined to make in the future." Haji Muhammad Jafar heeded this counsel and refused to accept the invitation of the governor. Muhammad Mehdi, Mirza Hassan Nuri, and a few others who disdained such advice presented themselves at the appointed hour at the home of the Mutamed. At the invitation of the host, Mirza Hassan, a noted Platonist, requested the Bab to elucidate certain abstruse philosophical doctrines connected with the Arshiyya of Mullah Sadra, the meaning of which only a few had been able to unravel. In simple and unconventional language, the Bab replied to each of his questions. Mirza Hassan, though unable to apprehend the meaning of the answers which he had received, realized how inferior was the learning of the so-called exponents of the Platonic and Aristotelian schools of thought of his day to the knowledge displayed by that youth. Muhammad Mehdi ventured in his turn to question the Bab regarding certain aspects of the Islamic law. Dissatisfied with the explanation he received, he began to contend idly with the Bab. He was soon silenced by the Mu'tamed, who, cutting short his conversation, turned to an attendant and, bidding him light the lantern, gave the order that Muhammad Mahdi be immediately conducted to his home. The Mu'tamed subsequently confided his apprehensions to the Imam Junayd. "I fear the machinations of the enemies of the Sayyid Bab," he told him. "The Shah has summoned him to Tehran. I am commanded to arrange for his departure. I deem it more advisable for him to stay in my home until such time as he can leave this city." The Imam Junayd acceded to his request and returned alone to his house. The Bab had tarried 40 days at the residence of the Imam Junayd. While he was still there, a certain Mullah Muhammad Taqi Harati, who was privileged to meet the Bab every day, undertook with his consent to translate one of his works entitled Risaleh Furi Adliye from the original Arabic into Persian. The service he thereby rendered to the Persian believers was marred, however, by his subsequent behavior. Fear suddenly seized him, and he was induced eventually to sever his connection with his fellow believers. Ere the Bab had transferred his residence to the house of the Mu'tamed, Mirza Ibrahim, father of the Sultan al-Shuhada, the elder brother of Mirza Muhammad Ali al-Nahri, to whom we have already referred, invited the Bab to his home one night. Mirza Ibrahim was the friend of the Imam Junayd, was intimately associated with him and controlled the management of all his affairs. The banquet which was spread for the Bab that night was one of unsurpassed magnificence. It was commonly observed that neither the officials nor the notables of the city had offered a feast of such magnitude and splendor. The Sultan al-Shuhada and his brother, the Mahbub Shuhada, who were lads of 9 and 11 respectively, served at that banquet and received special attention from the Bab. That night, during dinner, Mirza Ibrahim returned to his guest and said, "My brother, Mirza Muhammad Ali, has no child. I beg you to intercede in his behalf and to grant his heart's desire." The Bab took a portion of the food with which he had been served, placed it with his own hands on a platter, and handed it to his host, asking him to take it to Mirza Muhammad Ali and his wife. "Let them both partake of this," he said. "Their wish will be fulfilled." By virtue of that portion which the Bab had chosen to bestow upon her, the wife of Mirza Muhammad Ali conceived and in due time gave birth to a girl, who eventually was joined in wedlock with the Most Great Branch, a union that came to be regarded as the consummation of the hopes entertained by her parents.
The Prime Minister, Haji Mirza Agassi, was someone who was very much scared that if His Holiness the Bab had met Muhammad Shah, that he might lose his job. Who knows what would happen? So he was very much terrified. So he writes a letter to the Imam Junayd, the person that the Bab had stayed with to begin with, and who was there for 40 days, saying, "Look, what are you doing? Your job is to make sure the affairs of the state are safe. Why are you actually embracing this person and being behind him? You need to stop talking to him and the rest of it." Now, the Imam Junayd didn't want to do this because he actually had a love for the Bab. However, he decided to err on the side of caution. He realized that actually his job could be affected here. So he tried to slow things down. He tried to slow people meeting the Bab. Haji Mirza Agassi, the Prime Minister, then also wrote to a lot of other ulama, a lot of other clergy in Isfahan, saying to them, "Look, stop hanging out with the Bab. We need to try and stop them. Do all you can to break this down." Now, he's got such fear, the Prime Minister, of what might happen again if the king meets him. The governor then invited Haji Sayyid Asadullah to come to his house, and he said, "Look, why don't you come and meet the Bab? This is one of the ulama." And Haji Sayyid Asadullah turned around and said to him, "It's like, look, we can't compete with the Bab. The Bab, not only this Sayyid Bab, this Sayyid Ali Muhammad, not only does he start expounding on verses, he'll write like half the Quran in a couple of hours, and we just can't compete with him. I don't know what to do." So Haji Muhammad Jafar, who was one of the other clergy, one of the other high ulamas who was invited to this meeting, he decided that he's not going to go. However, Haji Muhammad Mahdi decides to go, and Mirza Hassan also decides to go. These two people decide to go and decide to have an interview with the Bab. Now, Mirza Hassan basically starts asking questions on this Ashriyah, basically, that he just didn't understand what the Bab was talking about. So he asked these questions, the Bab to expound on it. The Bab expounds perfectly, and he's just completely blown away. He's like, "I don't actually understand what's going on." Mullah Mehdi, the second one, starts asking questions about Islamic law and says to the Bab, "Can you explain about this?" as the Bab's responding, he just idly argues with him and he says, no, 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 blah, 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 blah. So much to the point where he starts getting a little bit rude and the governor has to ask him to get up and leave. He says, look, go back to your house. This is what needs to happen. We know that the Bab then spends 40 days at the house of the Imam Jami. Mullah Taghiya Harati, another believer, was there and basically translated some of the works of the Bab and was very much within the fold until later he starts going off on this kind of crazy path and loses the plot. We then have this story about Mirza Ibrahim, who's the brother of Mirza Mullah Ali al-Nahri. And he invites the Bab to his house and they have these discussions. And then Mirza Ibrahim says to the Bab, says, look, my brother, Mirza Mullah Ali al-Nahri, cannot conceive kids. Is there anything you can do? And so at this point, the Bab takes some of his food and says, give this to your brother and let him eat it. Sure enough, his brother, Mullah Muhammad Ali al-Nahri, takes this, eats it, and then he ends up having a little baby girl. And this girl is the girl who ended up marrying Abdul Baha.
Dave, the two children that are mentioned, are these the King of Martyrs and Beloved of Martyrs?
They're exactly that. The King
Oh
of
my God.
I was going to ask the same question.
Yes, yes. The King of Martyrs
And-
and Beloved of Martyrs are there and they're serving tea. They're aged 9 and 11 when this all takes place.
So it's interesting because it seems to me there's a parallel with the story of May Maxwell,
Exactly.
who was childless, and Abdul Baha did something, and the result was the birth of Mary Maxwell, Ruhiyya Khanum.
Absolutely.
Isn't that right?
Absolutely. I believe it was a pair that he gave. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was Abdul Baha gave them a pair.
This is very twisty and turny, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
God.
Same thing happened. Very interesting. Thank you so much again for joining me, each and every one of you. The story will continue and it gets more and more exciting, ladies and gentlemen. So thank you very much. If there are people out there who would like to take us into the devotional portion, that would be absolutely fantastic.
O my God, my Lord and my Master, I have detached myself from my kindred and have sought through thee to become independent of all that dwell on earth and ever ready to receive that which is praiseworthy in thy sight. Bestow on me such good as will make me independent of all else but thee, and grant me an ampler share of thy boundless favours. Verily, thou art the Lord of grace abounding. The Bab.